Indiana Newsdesk is made possible in part by Smithville Fiber Internet, streaming TV, home security and automation in Southern Indiana. More information at smithville.com. MALLOR Grodner Attorneys, providing legal services to clients and the community. Understanding, expertise, results. Bloomington and Indianapolis. LawMG.com. IU Alumni Association, connecting IU's network of alumni and sharing the Indiana spirit through scholarships, advocacy, and volunteerism. Alumni.iu.edu. IU Center for Rural Engagement, extending IU Bloomington resources to improve Hoosier lives in partnership with communities and organizations. Rural.indiana.edu. And by WTIU members. Thank you.
Coming up on Indiana Newsdesk. A woman who was protesting a farmer's market vendor with ties to white supremacy is seeking $500,000 from the city of Bloomington.
The most important thing that we hope the tort claim notice does is cause the city to rethink the entire manner in which they've handled the farmer's market.
President Trump plans to tout the new trade deal this weekend at a convention of American farmers. Ahead, we'll look at what farmers and Hoosier manufacturers are actually getting out of the deal. And sports wagering has exploded in Indiana since it was legalized last fall. That has some worried it might be too easy to put down a bet in Indiana.
With a telephone, I'm all of a sudden able to take bets from friends if I want. I could take bets from minors if I want.
Those stories, plus the latest news headlines from across the state, right now on Indiana Newsdesk. Welcome to Indiana Newsdesk. I'm Joe Wren. Well, the protester arrested at this summer's Bloomington Farmers Market is seeking $500,000 in damages from the city. Attorneys for Kara Cadu filed the tort claim Tuesday. They claim, among other things, that Cadu was wrongfully arrested. Sarah Whitmire reports.
Attorney Jeffrey Grodner is representing Kara Cadu. He filed a tort claim on her behalf Tuesday. Grodner says the farmers market is a public space, and market rules of behavior are not legal ordinances.
Can a police officer walking down the street say, hey, I'm just going to arrest you because I want to? No, there has to be probable cause to effect an arrest.
Cadu was arrested on misdemeanor charges for allegedly causing a disturbance in front of the booth belonging to Sarah Dye and Doug Mackey, the couple who run Schooner Creek Farm and have been tied by some to white supremacist groups. The claim says the city did not publicize its, quote, long-standing rules of behavior at the market until after Cadu's June 27th arrest. It also says the city published Cadu's address, subjecting her to threats from white nationalists.
The most important thing that we hope the tort claim notice does is cause the city to rethink the entire manner in which they've handled the farmers market.
The city has 90 days to respond to the tort claim notice. A spokesperson for the city says the city has no comment at this time. For Indiana Newsdesk, I'm Sarah Whitmire.
Now, if the city denies Cadu's claim or does not respond, Grodner says Cadu could file a lawsuit under state law and bring action in federal court for violation of her civil rights. President Trump's message to farmers: we did it. Farmers have been suffering in the fallout from the China trade war. Farmers' profits hit historic lows last year. But Trump says the new preliminary agreement with China will, in his words, massively benefit farmers. The deal includes larger purchases of U.S. soybeans and other farm goods. As Brock Turner reports, Hoosiers hope China can meet those targets.
Don Lamb farms several thousand acres of corn, soybeans, and wheat near Boone County. He's taking a wait-and-see approach, but he thinks the new China trade deal offers him and other farmers additional stability.
For me to say, yeah, I know that the pieces are in place to make this a good deal, I can't. Am I optimistic? Yes, and I appreciate the efforts that are being put forth to make it happen.
An unseasonably wet spring paired with decreasing trade opportunities in China pushed prices to their lowest in decades. Theoretically, news of the deal should have helped. That's because it includes a commitment from China to purchase more than $40 billion of farm goods each year. The problem is, though, some are skeptical as to whether or not it will happen, so markets have stayed mostly flat as a result.
I think the initial reaction to that is yeah, you're kind of surprised that there isn't a more positive reaction in the markets. But the reality is we still haven't sold the products and China still hasn't bought them. And until that happens, we really can't expect there to be much of a move in the market.
Some farmers also stand to benefit from the new United States-Mexico-Canada trade agreement, although many in a less significant way. The Senate voted in favor of that deal last week. Both are a good thing for the Trump re-election campaign as he works to shore up support among his core base. Lamb says he believes farmers will continue to stand by the president and his trade policies.
We're always optimistic. And also from a farmer's perspective, we know that we don't know all the details. And so we really have to just trust who we're working with to be putting those details in place.
But those who study trade policy say the deal isn't likely to have significant effects on businesses or farmers. That's largely due to the deal's lack of enforceability and how it deals with a conflict if a party fails to uphold its portion of the deal.
Any other trade agreement, you have a clear dispute settlement mechanism. It's the core of a trade agreement is to say there will be problems, there will be conflicts, there will be different opinions. Now, how do we address this conflict?
The president hailed the deal on Twitter, saying it was, quote, by far the greatest and biggest deal ever made. Housekrat, however, isn't convinced. He believes it has more to do with re-election than trade.
All other tariffs stay in place. The uncertainty stays in place. It is questionable to force Chinese to buy American agricultural products. And because this uncertainty, a lot has moved to other countries. So China is, for example, purchasing more agricultural goods from Brazil. And so I doubt that this will really have a significant impact. For sure not in 2020.
Estimates show Hoosier farmers export about 30% of the state's annual soybean harvest to China.
Now we're going to stay with the trade deal for a bit and learn more about how the agreement will affect Indiana's manufacturing sector. Mitch Legan joins us from the newsroom with that part of the story.
After 2 years of uncertainty surrounding President Trump's trade deal with China, many Indiana manufacturers, including Columbus-based Cummins, see his Phase 1 trade deal as a step in the right direction.
I think it is a win. This summer, things got a little heated between the two countries. It was not going in the right direction. We were threatening tariffs on each other every day. This certainly de-escalated everything and got everyone back at the table to discuss.
The new deal, passed last week, secures a pledge from China for nearly $80 billion in new manufacturing purchases. It doesn't call for new taxes, but still leaves $360 billion in tariffs in place. While Hyder says Cummins is pleased with the steps the Trump administration has taken with Phase 1, she says the tariffs that are still in place will continue to make things difficult.
It not only makes it more difficult for us to access that supply chain, but it also makes our products more costly, right? And again, like if we are competing with international, mainly European and Asian competitors, they are not having to incur the same costs that we are.
That's why they hope Trump will begin to reduce some of those tariffs when and if the two sides begin discussing a Phase 2 of the deal.
He makes a lot of noise and does some unilateral action and then escalates a situation to bring people to the bargaining table. And then he tries to bargain them into a more advantageous position.
Weinkauf says Trump's previous negotiating tactics make that Phase 2 hard to predict.
He hasn't actually been able to negotiate much. He's ended up relatively close to the status quo, and so essentially he's created a heightened bargaining situation and not actually been able to leverage that into substantial gains.
He says the tariffs in place will continue to drive up prices for many Chinese imports and goods produced in the United States.
And so I think the more complex world that we live in today means that a better trade strategy would be to not treat goods as simple goods that are produced entirely in one country, but instead to think about the disaggregated nature of trade and production in the contemporary economy.
There's no timeline for when the U.S. and China will finish up their trade talks, and until that happens, President Trump's tariffs will remain in place. So many of the issues with the deal will remain unresolved. Back to you, Joe.
And the U.S. Treasury chief this week responded to rumors that the deal would be done by the November election. Steve Mnuchin says there's no deadline for the Phase 2 discussions. Owen County High School students are learning how to own and operate a business as part of their coursework. As Emma Atkinson reports, it's about teaching kids real-world skills they can use when they graduate.
Owen Valley students work in the manufacturing lab using equipment for laser engraving, screen printing, embroidering, vinyl cutting, custom printing, and more. They're making items to sell for their new business, Patriot Manufacturing. Although this isn't Owen Valley's first student-run program, it's the first year for Patriot Manufacturing.
I think that this is going to help with my leadership skills and better time management skills. I think it's just going to overall prepare me for college after high school.
Teacher Kristen Porteas works with the students in the lab and helps them work through situations and sometimes problems that come up.
I think success is based on how well the students are learning and communicating.
The students sell the products in their school's spirit shop for other students and faculty members to purchase. For Indiana Newsdesk, I'm Emma Atkinson.
Coming up next on Indiana Newsdesk. Since September, Hoosiers have spent nearly $500 million betting on sports events in casinos and online. Ahead, the impact on Hoosiers and the state economy. And musical therapy in intensive care. An IU Institute thinks it could help elderly patients cope with delirium. These stories and more right here on Indiana Newsdesk.
The WTIU WFIU news team connects Indiana to the world. We bring you the top news of the day on radio, TV, and online. We round up the stories that have people talking each week and dig deep into the issues that affect your community the most. The WTIU WFIU news team is where you are and telling your story.
In a time of change, where can you find in-depth reporting and thoughtful analysis? Washington Week on PBS. Join moderator Robert Costa.
When I was at the Capitol this week, I encountered the same.
And a panel of award-winning journalists.
You're seeing a divided nation and you're seeing.
For insights and perspective.
Tonight there was a key development in the Senate.
You won't find anywhere else.
What a week.
Washington Week.
Welcome back to Indiana Newsdesk. Now for the latest on this week's top stories. Legislation to spend nearly $300 million in excess budget funds on higher education is headed to the governor's desk. Democrats say they should boost teacher pay this year, but Republicans want to use the money to pay for capital projects. The bill is the first piece of legislation in the 2020 session to make it to the governor. Well, Lucky's is closing nearly all of its grocery stores across the country, including its Bloomington location. The announcement came on Tuesday, and on Wednesday, the store began selling things at deep discount.
I have a hard time not seeing them continue to grow just because people like so much variety in their food nowadays and having a nice selection of things. And I think people are much more willing to pay for a premium if it means they get quality food.
The Bloomington store opened in 2015. It'll close for good on February 12th. Spencer Pride is working with town officials to plan the group's annual Pride Fest. The Spencer Pride Fest will not be held at the Owen County Courthouse for the first time in 13 years after the commissioners passed a new ordinance that makes it difficult to hold events on county grounds. Spencer Pride says the ordinance is a roundabout way of keeping its annual LGBTQ event off county property. Organizers hope to get official approval for street closures from the Spencer Town Council early next month. The clock is ticking for conservationists to make suggestions on altering the U.S. Forestry Service's plan to log 4,700 acres of non-contiguous land in the Hoosier National Forest. The agency says the logging will remove older trees that could be a threat to species, but the Indiana Forest Alliance says sediment from the logging could end up in the South Fork of Salt Creek.
We have very strict standards of best management practices that have a good track record, where there's solid research that shows that they are effective at keeping sediment from reaching water bodies.
The IFA says it should have some alternative suggestions for the project before the February 3rd deadline. Bloomington Transit is considering changes to a dozen of its routes. The Transit Board's proposal would eliminate late evening bus service and in most cases replace it with micro-transit service, which allows users to call a bus with an app, similar to Uber and Lyft.
It's a concept that's growing in popularity, especially at times of day when ridership is less than what it normally would be, such as at night or on weekends.
May says the changes wouldn't result in any savings, but it'll allow transit to reallocate buses to routes that have more demand. Indiana authorities would have more time to pursue child sexual abuse cases under a bill endorsed this week. The change would allow an additional 5 years from 31 to 36 with DNA evidence or an attacker's confession. The bill originally eliminated the statute of limitations entirely for child sex crimes and rape, but that couldn't get support in committee. Governor Holcomb says he hasn't decided whether to support the GOP candidate challenging Attorney General Curtis Hill for his job. State Revenue Commissioner Adam Krupp formally announced last week he would resign as State Revenue Commissioner to pursue the state's top lawyer position. Hill is awaiting the outcome from an investigation into allegations of drunkenly groping 4 women. Holcomb and other GOP leaders have called on Hill to resign. Terre Haute Mayor Duke Bennett says the NAACP is asking the city to stop its contract with A&E's Live PD TV show. A letter from the Terre Haute branch of the NAACP says the show exploits residents at their most vulnerable time while conveying guilt prematurely. Bennett says he's heard mostly all positive feedback from the show.
So we hope that helps with recruiting. It also helps with that transparency so the people can see who watch the show, or local people who watch it can say, wow, I didn't realize these are the kind of things they deal with all the time.
He says he's planning to meet with NAACP leaders soon to hear their concerns. The Super Bowl is just a week away, and Hoosiers will be able to legally wager on sports for the first time without leaving the state. Sports wagering started in September, and casinos around the state are cashing in on the extra business. But as Adam Pinsker reports, some critics worry that betting has now become too accessible.
It's early on a foggy Friday afternoon in East Chicago, Indiana, but the sports book at the Ameristar Casino is busy taking people's action before a weekend full of NFL playoff games, pro and college basketball.
We have seen a large increase in the amount of traffic, the amount of volume that we're seeing from a customer perspective.
Vice President and General Manager of Ameristar, Matt Schufert, says his casino was the first to start a sports book in the Chicagoland area after a new law legalizing sports betting in Indiana went into effect September 1st. The legalization coincided with the beginning of football season, which Schufert says is the sport people bet on the most.
It's something new, right? And I think it's very attractive to a customer who may not necessarily gamble on traditional tables or slots. We're seeing folks we've never seen here before, new customers, new faces.
According to the State Gaming Commission, people wagered $35 million in Indiana casinos during the first month it was legal. That increased to $91.6 million in October, $147 million in November, and it increased again in December to $161 million. That brings the total people wagered at Indiana sportsbooks to nearly $500 million in just 4 months.
I think that was what we thought it was going to be. I think that the gaming has progressed as expected so far.
State Representative Ben Smaltz voted against the legislation that legalized sports betting because it also allowed Hoosiers to legally access sports betting apps like DraftKings and FanDuel. Indiana is one of a handful of states that allow mobile betting, and you can't drive around the state without seeing billboards advertising the product. Smaltz worries that sports betting has become too accessible.
With a telephone, I'm all of a sudden able to take bets from friends if I want. I could take bets from minors if I want. At a casino, that's much harder to happen.
Smaltz says the state has collected just shy of $4 million in tax revenues from sports betting. Nearly half of that came from online wagering. But he says the revenue is just a drop in the bucket compared to Indiana's overall $30 billion budget.
I think what has really helped is the reduction of taxes on Hoosiers, the lowering of the corporate income tax, the lowering of the individual income tax rate has produced what we have as a $290 million surplus.
While gaming tax revenue might not impact the state budget significantly, it has helped boost employment at Ameristar and other casinos. Schufert says since his sports book opened, he's hired 15 new employees and added more table games and slot machines. The stakes are high for casinos in Northwest Indiana because Hard Rock broke ground on a new casino a few miles away from the Ameristar in Gary. It's set to open in 2021, but Schufert is not fazed by the competition.
I think more competition just brings out the better in the rest of us. Am I worried? No, I think it's going to create some more exposure, give some more awareness to the fact that sports betting is now legal in Indiana.
And soon, Indiana will no longer be the only state in the Midwest where sports betting is allowed. Illinois legalized it last year and is in the process of allowing casinos to open sports books, meaning residents there will no longer have to drive to Indiana to place a bet. For Indiana Newsdesk, I'm Adam Pinsker.
Listening to music could be instrumental in preventing people admitted to intensive care units from developing delirium. That's according to one researcher for IU Health's Regan Street Institute. As Benta Boutier reports, a recently completed small pilot phase came back with positive results. They plan to start recruiting subjects for a larger confirmatory study in February.
Dr. Barbara Kahn is leading the first study to see whether listening to music can prevent development of delirium in the intensive care unit. He's working with older patients who've been admitted to an intensive care unit and put on a breathing machine.
So when people get sick, they get admitted to the ICU. Most of the people we end up putting on breathing machines because they cannot breathe by themselves. So when they are on mechanical ventilators and they are super sick, somehow they develop this form of acute brain failure called delirium.
Kahn says close to half of people admitted to the ICU are put on a ventilator machine. Of those, 80% will develop delirium, something he sees as a serious concern.
When you develop delirium in the ICU, you tend to stay longer in the ICU, and you have less chances of going back home and more chances of going to a nursing home or a rehab facility if you're in the ICU. The second other very important factor is when you develop delirium in the intensive care unit, the chances of you developing dementia once you get out of the ICU rises quite a bit.
Kahn says around 33% of patients put on a breathing machine in the ICU develop dementia in the 3 years after being treated. He says the goal of the study was to find an easy-to-implement solution that wouldn't have unforeseen consequences to the patients.
The beauty of using music in the ICU is once we complete the study and confirm the results of our pilot, this could be easily implementable in any of the ICU.
He says the goal of the study was to find an easy-to-implement solution that wouldn't have unforeseen consequences to the patients. The study uses two groups, one receiving music for 2 hours a day and another group who doesn't. His study will go for the next 5 years. Kahn says his goal is to get patients treatment for one health problem without creating another.
We would like to have an ICU when you get admitted, you get taken care of, and you would not be worried about developing dementia in the long term.
For Indiana Newsdesk, I'm Benta Boutier.
And Terre Haute residents are seeing a resurgence of downtown museums. We look into why some of them are relocating to the city center. Terre Haute could have as many as 9 downtown museums in the next few years. The Holocaust Candles Museum announced plans to move to the vacant First National Bank Historic Building on Wabash Avenue. Soon, a Larry Bird Museum will spring up as part of the newly planned convention center. And the Vigo County Historical Museum opened downtown in November.
We're very lucky to have the kind of buildings here, the old ones that are perfect for opening museums.
The new space is in the former home of the Ehrman Manufacturing Company, built in 1895. It's blocks away from Terre Haute's dining and retail space.
You know, Terre Haute is famous for being the birthplace of the Coca-Cola bottle. We do have a bottling line. Let me go push the button and I'll run it for you.
Renovations and construction of the $3.2 million museum was funded by grants, pledges, and donations.
He left $500 in his will because he wanted the county to be able to buy a bell for the courthouse. And the bell that was purchased with his donation actually still hangs in the courthouse and still rings.
And there's still fundraising.
You know, one of the things about a local museum is that there's not a lot of appeal outside of where you live. So people who wanted to see this happen are local people, or they have been here before, they lived here before, and they still feel a connection to our community.
The new location is more than twice the size of its previous Victorian house on the outskirts of town. The 3 floors give the museum an opportunity to keep doing new things.
We will change the exhibits. There will be a reason to come back.
Terre Haute Mayor Duke Bennett says it's not a collaborative plan to relocate or build museums downtown.
We're all excited about that because then within walking distance you can get to 8 different places pretty easy.
Bennett says the new downtown activities complement the city's new marketing campaign, See You in Terre Haute.
Everybody wants to hear the legend of Stiffy Green.
But Tingley says it's more than tourism. It's installing a sense of community pride. The city has seen budget deficits, controversy over a new jail, and divisions over allowing a casino to be built.
I think if you're local, we hope that you start to feel a little more proud of Terre Haute and Vigo County, that you see all the things that have happened in our history.
The Clabber Girl Museum and the Terre Haute Children's Museum are also located downtown. And we have more online. Have a great weekend.
Indiana Newsdesk is made possible in part by Smithville Fiber Internet, streaming TV, home security and automation in Southern Indiana. More information at smithville.com. MALLOR Grodner Attorneys, providing legal services to clients and the community. Understanding, expertise, results. Bloomington and Indianapolis. LawMG.com. IU Alumni Association, connecting IU's network of alumni and sharing the Indiana spirit through scholarships, advocacy, and volunteerism. Alumni.iu.edu. IU Center for Rural Engagement, extending IU Bloomington resources to improve Hoosier lives in partnership with communities and organizations. Rural.indiana.edu. And by WTIU members. Thank you.